The first time she smiled at me, it wasn't the kind of smile that made the room light up. It was quieter, the kind that made me notice the air around her shift. I was unloading boxes into the old apartment I'd just rented, the one above hers, the one that smelled faintly of lavender and dust. She opened her door a crack, just enough to peek out, her hair loosely pinned up, a few strands falling across her forehead. "You're making too much noise," she said, but her voice didn't scold. It was soft, and there was a little tremor in it, like she hadn't expected to hear anything, or maybe hadn't expected to notice me. I froze for a second, my hand stilling on the cardboard box. "Sorry," I said, even though it didn't feel like an apology. Something about her, her calm, the way she looked at me, made my chest tighten. She leaned against the doorframe, one hand tucked casually into her pocket, but her eyes lingered. There was an unspoken something there, a flicker, a recognition I couldn't place. I wanted to say something clever, something that would make her laugh, but my mouth went dry. "I'm Clara," she said finally, and that one word made me forget how to breathe. "Ethan," I muttered, and it sounded smaller than it should. She smiled again, just a little, and that's when I noticed the subtle weight in her gaze, the way it held both curiosity and caution. I guess she wasn't used to strangers being polite, or maybe she just wasn't used to feeling noticed. "I think the neighbors are supposed to introduce themselves," she said, tilting her head slightly, like she was weighing whether she liked me yet. "Yeah, I'm new here," I said, shifting from foot to foot. My fingers itched to brush off the dust on my sleeves, but I didn't. I didn't want to look too eager, but I couldn't stop staring at her. There was a stillness between us, the kind that hums quietly, the kind that makes you hyper-aware of small things, the faint scent of her perfume, the gentle hum of traffic outside, the way her hand lingered on the doorframe. My stomach flipped, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. "You're unpacking all by yourself?" she asked, and I could hear a soft amusement in her voice. "Yeah, mostly," I said. I wanted to tell her that I could use help, that I wanted her help, that I wanted to hear her voice again before I'd even crossed the threshold into her apartment. But I didn't. Instead, I just nodded, hoping she wouldn't notice my hands trembling slightly. For a moment, she didn't speak, just tilted her head and looked at me. And then, she laughed. Quiet, soft, like she was letting something slip she didn't usually show. My chest ached, and I didn't know why. "I guess I'll keep an eye on you," she said finally, and it wasn't a warning. It was something else. Something dangerously inviting. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words stuck. I wanted to tell her she was beautiful, that I couldn't stop looking at her, that I already felt something I shouldn't. But instead I nodded again, and she gave me one last smile before retreating into her apartment. I was left with the sound of the closing door, the faint creak of hinges, and a sudden awareness that I wanted more of her, more of this strange tension that made my chest feel too full. And then, just as I was about to set the box down and convince myself to be practical, the doorbell rang. Her name flashed on my mind as I hesitated, hand hovering over the button, my heart pounding with a mix of dread and anticipation. Who could it be? I didn't know who rang the doorbell, but when I opened it, there she was again, Clara, holding a basket of freshly baked cookies. Her hair was down this time, loose over her shoulders, and the soft, golden light from her apartment spilled onto the hallway, making her look even more unapproachable and familiar at once. "I thought you might need a break," she said, placing the basket carefully in my hands. "Moving in alone seems exhausting." I tried to sound casual, but my fingers brushed hers when I took the basket, and the brief contact sent a jolt up my arm. "Thanks, really." My voice sounded too high, too eager. I cleared my throat, wishing I could stop noticing every little thing about her. As I carried the basket inside, I found myself watching her out of the corner of my eye. She wasn't just my neighbor, she was my landlord's widow, the one people whispered about, the one who had built her life quietly after a loss. There was a kind of sadness about her that seemed permanent, a trace of regret she carried like a second skin. I wondered what she had given up for stability, for appearances, for practicality. "I used to live here with my husband," she said softly, as if reading my thoughts. "It's quieter now. Sometimes too quiet." Her gaze flicked to the window, to the street outside, and I sensed a wistfulness that made my chest tighten. I didn't know whether to apologize for intruding on her memory or to feel lucky she was letting me in at all. I wanted to ask more, but the words stuck. She was older, experienced, untouchable in a way I wasn't supposed to get close to. The age gap wasn't the only thing. There was the way people would look if they noticed me lingering, the way her past might complicate anything I could ever hope for. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about her smile, the softness in her voice, the warmth that seemed to leak from her without trying. "You make it sound lonely," I said, finally daring to speak. "Do you miss him?" She didn't answer right away. Her eyes lowered to the basket for a moment, then met mine again with a faint, sad smile. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Sometimes I forget I should be angry or sad, and I just remember that I'm still alive. That there are moments worth noticing." There it was again, the subtle invitation in her words, the kind of thing that made a person feel both guilty and alive at the same time. I wanted to tell her that she made me feel alive too, but instead I just nodded, letting the silence stretch between us. Without thinking, I reached out to brush a crumb off her sleeve, and our fingers touched. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a fleeting contact, but the electricity in that instant was undeniable. She didn't pull away. Instead, her hand lingered for a second longer than necessary, and I realized that the risk, the taboo, the impossible age gap, none of that mattered in the quiet intensity of that touch. She laughed softly, almost shyly, and I laughed too, though it came out uneven. "I suppose you're the only person in this building I don't have to pretend with," she said, and her voice carried a weight I couldn't shake. I wanted to tell her I felt the same, but I swallowed the words, letting the tension hang, heavy and electric between us. And just like that, without another word, the world shrank to that tiny hallway, to the basket of cookies, to the warmth of a hand that had dared to linger. I kept replaying that moment in my head, the brush of her fingers against mine, the quiet laugh that followed. I told myself it meant nothing, that it was harmless. But then she showed up the next evening, leaning against the doorframe, holding a cup of tea. Her presence made the apartment feel smaller, warmer, impossible to ignore. "Thought you might want some company," she said, tilting her head, her hair falling over one shoulder. Her eyes held something unspoken, something that made my chest pound. I nodded, trying to appear casual. "Thanks. I appreciate it." We sat across from each other at the small kitchen table. The tea steamed between us. Silence stretched, thick and loaded. I could feel her eyes on me, and I realized I was staring, probably too openly. "You know," she started, breaking the silence, "I'm not supposed to let people get close. It's safer that way." I swallowed, my fingers tightening around the cup. "Closer than what?" I asked, my voice cracking slightly. Her lips twitched in a half smile, half sigh. "Then this. Then you." I froze. The words hung between us, fragile and dangerous. My heart raced. "Clara." I started, but she shook her head slightly, cutting me off with that subtle, quiet authority that both terrified and drew me in. Before I could react, there was a knock at the door. We both stiffened. My roommate's voice called out from the hallway, joking and loud. "Ethan! You moving in or hiding?" Clara's expression flickered, a mix of relief and annoyance. She rose quickly, adjusting her blouse as if to erase the tension in the air. "I should go," she murmured. "No, wait." I reached out, but she hesitated, eyes flicking to mine, conflicted. Then she smiled faintly, the kind of smile that made my chest ache, and slipped out before I could stop her. The door clicked shut, leaving me with the echo of her presence and a whirlpool of guilt. She wasn't mine to want. She was older, vulnerable in ways I couldn't fully understand. My roommate barged in seconds later, oblivious to the storm I felt. I poured another cup of tea, empty, unmoving. Thoughts raced. I wanted her here, with me, closer than appropriate. And yet, I feared the consequences, the gossip, the whispers, the unspoken rules we were already bending. And then my phone buzzed. A text from Clara. "Don't forget what we almost let happen." My stomach lurched. My hands trembled. Almost. Those 3 words made everything real: the desire, the risk, the impossibility of ignoring her. I tried to pull away from the edge of that feeling, to tell myself it was foolish, but the memory of her touch, her laugh, the way her eyes had softened when she looked at me, it refused to leave. I was pulled closer even as I tried to resist. I sank into the couch, the text burning in my pocket. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent. Inside, everything had changed. The line between what was safe and what I wanted had vanished. And I knew, with a sudden, terrifying certainty, that this was only the beginning. I couldn't stop thinking about her. Every little thing reminded me, how her laugh lingered in my head, the way she smelled faintly of vanilla and rain, the curve of her hand when it had brushed mine. And yet the guilt gnawed at me. She was older, experienced, complicated. I was reckless and impulsive. Still, I wanted her. That evening I returned from work to find her apartment door slightly ajar. My heart skipped. Hesitating, I knocked softly. No answer. I pushed it open a little, and she was there, looking out the window, one hand on the sill, the other gripping a mug of coffee like it anchored her to reality. She didn't turn. "Ethan," she said quietly, almost like a warning, almost like relief. I just wanted to make sure you were okay," I said, stepping closer, my hands shoved deep into my pockets. She turned then, and I saw it, her eyes dark with emotion, her lips slightly parted. "I'm not okay," she admitted, voice trembling. "You make me feel things I shouldn't. Things I can't control." My chest tightened. "I feel the same," I whispered, the words burning as soon as they left my mouth. Her gaze faltered, and I could see the fear in it, fear of herself, of me, of the impossible road we were about to walk. I wanted to reach out, to hold her, but something stopped me. Some invisible wall of rules, consequences, the past pressing down. "I shouldn't let you." "I shouldn't," she said, shaking her head, her hands clutching the mug so tightly her knuckles turned white. "I can't stop thinking about you," I said, stepping closer, closing the gap, my voice low, almost desperate. "Even when I try, I can't. Every time I see you, She cut me off, her hand flying up to my chest, pressing firmly. "Ethan," she said, voice breaking. "If anyone knew, if anyone saw, what we're doing, it would ruin everything." I swallowed, but I couldn't move away. My heart was pounding, my skin buzzing. I wanted to argue, to tell her it didn't matter, that the world could wait. But her eyes, so sad, so alive, made me pause. Then a knock at her door froze us both. We stiffened. Her eyes darted to the entrance. Her hand lingered on my chest for just a fraction longer than necessary, then fell away. I could feel the sudden absence like a punch to the gut. "I have to see who that is," she said, her voice trembling. I nodded, unable to speak, the tension between us electric, unbearable. My thoughts raced. Was it someone from her past? A friend? A neighbor? Something, or someone, that could undo the fragile thread connecting us. And as she moved toward the door, I realized I couldn't stop the moment, couldn't stop the attraction, couldn't stop myself from hoping that the next instant, whatever it brought, would change everything. But I had no idea whether it would be salvation or disaster. The door clicked open, and for a moment, I thought it might be someone innocent, another neighbor, maybe a delivery. But the expression on her face stopped me cold. "Ethan, it's my daughter," she said, voice tight, eyes wide. "She saw us. She heard everything." I froze, my stomach dropping. Her daughter, she hadn't mentioned her before. Of course she hadn't. This wasn't just a neighborly complication, this was personal. This was someone whose life I could disrupt before I even understood it. She asked why you're always here. Why you laugh together, why your hands touch. Clara swallowed, her lips trembling. I tried to explain, but her voice faltered, and I could see the guilt, the shame, the fear all at once. She looked smaller, fragile in a way that made me ache, and yet there was also a fire in her eyes. One that said she would protect herself, no matter what. I started, but the words died in my throat. How could I explain that the tension between us wasn't just casual friendship? That my feelings weren't fleeting? That I wanted her more than I had any right to? Clara turned away, pacing the small kitchen, her hands tugging at her hair. I thought I could keep this separate from her life. But now it's all tangled. Her voice broke, and I finally stepped closer. Clara, I didn't mean for it to get this complicated, I said softly. I can't stop thinking about you. You're impossible to ignore. She laughed bitterly, shaking her head. Impossible to ignore, yes. And impossible to do right by, apparently. I promised myself I wouldn't let anyone else get hurt because of me. And now. Her voice trailed off, and she pressed her hand against her forehead, eyes closed. I reached out, but she flinched at my touch, retreating just enough to remind me that this wasn't just my struggle. This wasn't just desire, it was responsibility, consequence, history. I should tell her the truth. She whispered, almost to herself. Everything. My chest tightened. The idea terrified me. If she did, everything would change. If she didn't, then we were already crossing a line we couldn't uncross. She looked at me, her eyes glistening, full of hurt and longing. Do you think I should? The question wasn't just about her daughter, it was about us. About whether we had any right to feel this way at all. And I didn't know. I wanted to say yes, wanted to throw caution to the wind and claim the impossible, but I also wanted to protect her from the fallout. I faltered, unsure if honesty would save us or destroy everything. Before I could answer, her phone buzzed loudly on the counter. She glanced at the screen, her face paling. And then I saw the name, her ex-husband. She stared at her phone, the name blinking on the screen like a warning sign. Her ex-husband. My chest ached as I watched her hesitate, thumb hovering over the call button. Every second stretched, weighted with tension. I can't pretend this doesn't exist, she whispered, voice trembling. He has a right to know. And maybe I do too. I wanted to say something, anything, but my throat felt tight, words trapped. So I just stepped closer, careful not to crowd her. Clara, I said softly. Whatever happens, I'm here. I don't want to make it worse, but I can't step back either. Her hands shook as she gripped the phone. Then, slowly, she lowered it, as if letting go of the storm inside. Her eyes met mine, raw and unguarded, and I saw everything there: fear, longing, guilt, desire. I don't know if it's right, she admitted. I don't know if it's fair. But I want this. I want us. I swallowed, my heart racing, the electricity between us impossible to ignore. I want it too, I said, voice low, urgent. I don't care about right or fair right now. I just need you. Her lips trembled, a small smile breaking through the tension. She reached out slowly, brushing my hand with hers, a feather-light touch that made my chest ache. And then, finally, she leaned in. Not a kiss, yet, but close enough that I could feel her breath, her warmth, the faint scent of coffee and vanilla clinging to her. I'm terrified, she whispered. I know, I admitted, letting my forehead rest against hers. Me too. But maybe that's the point. Maybe we're meant to be terrified together. Her eyes closed for a moment, and then she opened them, steadying herself. Promise me something, she said. Anything, I breathed. No matter what happens, no regrets. We don't pretend. We don't hide. We just feel. I nodded, gripping her hand tightly. I promise. We stayed like that, suspended between desire and fear, reality and possibility. Every heartbeat was a question, every small touch a declaration. I didn't know what the future held, her ex, the world outside, the whispered warnings in my head, but in that moment, nothing else mattered. The doorbell rang. We jumped slightly, and she laughed softly, tension breaking for the first time in hours. But our eyes locked again, unspoken, intimate. The world was pressing back in, and yet we had carved a small, impossible space for ourselves. I wanted to ask her if she'd call him, if we should run, if this could last, but no words came. The silence between us was enough, charged with trust and danger and hope. I leaned closer, brushing my lips to her temple, and whispered, "We'll figure it out." She smiled, eyes glinting with tears and mischief, and whispered back, "Together." And in that fragile, fleeting, impossible moment we were. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the thin curtains, warming the apartment in a way that made everything feel both fragile and alive. Clara sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee, her hair still slightly tousled from sleep. I leaned against the counter, watching her, memorizing the quiet grace in her movements, the way her fingers curved around the mug, the slight frown in her brow as she thought. We didn't speak immediately. We didn't need to. The tension from yesterday lingered, yes, but it had softened into something warmer, something real. We had crossed a line, yes, but in doing so, we had found a space that belonged only to us. "I called him," she said finally, voice calm but not unafraid. "He understands better than I thought. And I." Her eyes met mine, steady now, filled with a strange mix of relief and certainty. "I made my choice." I smiled, not because everything was perfect, nothing about this was, but because she had chosen authenticity, chosen truth, chosen us. The risk was still there, but for the first time, it didn't feel impossible. We sat together in companionable silence, listening to the faint hum of the city outside. Every glance, every half-smile, every brush of our hands across the table carried more meaning than words ever could. It wasn't a fairy tale, it was messy, real, and ours. Later, we walked down the street together, slow steps that didn't need to rush. People passed, indifferent, and yet we moved through the crowd with a quiet intimacy, connected by shared glances and the occasional brush of fingertips. I realized that the world hadn't changed, the past hadn't disappeared, and life would still demand its compromises, but we had each other, and that made the risk worthwhile. At one point, she stopped and looked up at me, her eyes catching the sunlight. "Do you think we'll be okay?" I took her hand in mine, firm and certain this time. "We'll figure it out. We always do." And there was a pause, not empty, but full of unspoken promises and quiet understanding. The kind of silence that makes the heart beat faster and slower at the same time. We turned the corner, walking towards something uncertain but ours, toward a life that would be neither simple nor safe, but undeniably ours. And in that uncertainty, there was hope. Hope that some things, love, desire, connection, were worth the risk, worth the mistakes, worth the fear. She squeezed my hand gently, a small gesture, but it said more than words ever could. I squeezed back, and for a moment, the world fell away. Maybe tomorrow would be messy. Maybe the future would challenge us again. But in this moment, we had each other. And sometimes that was enough. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?